Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, the death of the Thai king Bhumibol has left a vacuum in the country. And as the head of the country's Privy Council steps in as regent, how does Crown Prince Vajira Longkorn fit into the picture for now? And work to live or live to work. Extremely long hours in the office are driving some of China's white-collar workers to even death. What will it take for the country to intervene? First of all, in the Thai capital, tens of thousands of mourners continue to flock to the Grand Palace where the body of the late king Bhumibol lies in state. Certain media restrictions have already been lifted, and the government has allowed entertainment venues to operate as long as it does not compromise the solemn mood. However, the official mourning period could continue well into next year and is likely to have a serious impact on the country's economy. Our reporter Tony Chang brings us this report from Bangkok.
In Bangkok, black is the new black. Black shirts and tops have been flying off the racks since the announcement of the king's death. Prices have been rising too. With an official mourning period of 12 months, mourning attire is going to be obligatory in Thailand for the foreseeable future. Elsewhere, business is not so good. Few customers in the gold shops of Chinatown, and many expect business to slow down to a crawl for the next month as people mourn their monarch. Here in Chinatown, the king will be greatly missed. Over the course of his reign, the ethnic Chinese community thrived in business and as citizens.
The king looked after his people as if they were his children. He didn't separate them according to race. He loved them equally, whether they were Thai or Chinese, and thus the relationship between the Thais and Chinese was very close, as if we're from the same family.
The outlook was gloomy on the stock exchange too. Last week, as the king's health deteriorated, the market recorded sharp falls, and on Monday the SET slipped further. And the lengthy mourning period is casting a shadow over all aspects of life. This couple were going ahead with their wedding ceremony, but cancelled the reception.
We prepared everything, but we cut it off at the last minute. Everybody understands the situation. It didn't take us long to cancel our reception.
But what may seem natural for Thais could be harder for foreign visitors to understand. The Tourism Authority has said that visitors are still welcome, but has asked that they take the situation into consideration. This is the Khao San Road, one of the most popular destination points for backpackers arriving in Thailand. And while there are still many tourists here, they are being asked to show their respect for Thais as they mourn their king. In fact, the government's asked entertainment venues to tone down their activities. And while those restrictions are only expected to last for the next 30 days, the year-long period of mourning is likely to have a considerable impact on the tourist industry. And Bangkok's famous nightlife venues have been shuttered, the colourful bars and clubs closed. For the foreseeable future, this is no longer the land of smiles. Tony Cheng, CCTV, Bangkok.
For the latest situation in Thailand after the pass away of the late king, I'm joined by our reporter Tony Chung in Bangkok. Tony, what are some of the traditional processes that the country like Thailand need to follow to commemorate a beloved king? What kind of political messages does it send to people like you, a reporter on the ground?
Well, I mean, obviously, there's a very widespread sense of mourning. It is something that the government has said will go on in official venues, statewide, for at least a year. But we don't have very much information about this, in part because it hasn't happened for such a long time. The king was on the throne for 70 years, so for most people, he's the only monarch they've known, and the ceremony which surrounds the passing of a monarch is something which Thais just haven't had for a very long time. The other problem is this isn't very openly discussed in Thai public life. There is a very heavy punishment of 15 years in prison for anyone who says anything deemed offensive to the king, the queen, the regent, and the crown prince. And in this current environment, particularly since the military coup, that's been very sensitive. So it pretty much made all discussion of the royal family taboo. So I think to a certain extent, people are rather unsure about what the next step is.
I see. The crown prince at this moment, Tony, have already declared that he will not succeed the throne rather until a year later. How is the public, even though they would not be able to openly talk about this, but from your knowledge and information, reacting to this?
Well, again, this is rather confusing. We haven't actually heard from the Crown Prince himself. He's said through the Prime Minister that he wants a certain amount of time to mourn his father. Now, yesterday, the Prime Minister said that there wouldn't be a coronation until after the funeral. Well, it's expected that the funeral rites won't happen for at least a year, possibly longer. So that was then interpreted as people, in most people's minds, as understanding that the Crown Prince wouldn't take the throne for a year. And a regent has been nominated, a former Prime Minister and an ex-general. But today, the Prime Minister made a different statement saying the King could take the throne between 5 and 7 days. So again, it's mixed messages. I think people are rather confused. Again, they're not able to speak about it, so they're not really sure. The message from the government is that it's very much business as usual. There is a regent in place who's the acting head of state, and when the Crown Prince is ready to take the throne, then the throne is there for him to take. But I think it is rather confusing. We're getting all sorts of different messages from the Prime Minister. It seems as if the situation seems to be changing every day. And of course, while so many Thais are grieving, that doesn't help the situation.
Well, even if we do not know when the prince, if it is the prince going to take the throne, when it's likely to happen, we do know general election, at least according to plan, is likely to happen next year. So what would all of this mean for that very big political event inside the country, Tony?
Absolutely. Well, this has been the question on many people's lips, and the Prime Minister has addressed it directly, saying that the elections will go ahead in the latter part of 2017 as scheduled. But here again, we run into obstacles, because the constitution that was recently approved in a referendum over the summer hasn't yet been signed. It needs to be signed by the monarch. Now, whether that will actually go to the acting regent at the moment, General Prem, or they will wait for the Crown Prince to take the throne, it's not sure. But as a constitutional head of state, the monarch is very important to the processes that this goes through. So it's very important that he is there to sort of sign on the papers, as it were. But I think also for the stability of Thailand, many people looked to the king, to the last king, as a unifying factor. Thai politics has always been very divided. There have always been warring factions.
Right.
But the one man who stood above it was the king. Now that he's gone, it does leave a very empty space in Thai public life. And I think they feel the need for somebody to step into that very quickly. And if it isn't the Crown Prince, then I think there's going to be a certain amount of uncertainty about what the future holds.
Tony Chang, our very own in Bangkok, Thailand. Thank you so much, Tony. For more analysis on Thailand's political landscape, in our Beijing studio, we're having Mr. Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow from China Institute of International Studies, certainly a well-known expert in China about the Asian countries, and also in Bangkok, in Thailand, we're having Mr. Shang Purpakong, who is a former advisor to the Thai government. Also joining us from Singapore, we have Mr. Lin Tan Wai, adjunct research fellow at National University of Singapore. Gentlemen, let me begin by asking you about the uncertainties our reporter mentioned several times. One is whether it's the prince or not. Secondly, when. Thirdly, the relations between the monarchy and also the junta, the military government. And fourthly, the next general election. Putting political processes according to the constitutions aside, what do you make of these very mixed times, schedules, and relationship? May I go to you first, Mr. Purpakong? I understand from Thailand there might be some difficulties commenting about the specific issue, but I do want to invite your expertise as well. Mr. Purpakong.
I believe In general, Thai believe in tradition more so than papers. In this particular case, with the succession, there are three processes at work here. First of all, there is the palace law. Second, there is a constitution. And third, there is tradition. And what Thais normally go by is first and foremost by tradition. Therefore, I believe that when General Prayut, who is the most important caretaker of this government, power of Thailand, he controls it for the moment. His role for his government is bigger now. There's a vacuum of civilian administration. He is the head of the junta, and therefore he's the one that who would abide by the wishes that succession, the coming of the next king, when he make the announcement. I believe him to be at his word, and I believe that the transition, it would happen within a couple of weeks, as he said, and then we'll be talking about official coronation, and that's a certain period. But also it was addressed fairly clearly yesterday, was that the Crown Prince also asked General Prem to be the regent, but due to many multiple sources, and perhaps as Tony Cheng said, there's so many fluid information, but this is the way I believe it would most likely happen.
It's a very long answer you give, sir, but certainly we try to read certain messages out of your very eloquent and well illustrated answer. Let me go to you, Mr. Lim, in Singapore. The most important thing is, what is the relationship now between the junta, which is the military government, and the royal family, particularly the possible one that is likely to take the throne, the crown prince? What do you make of it?
Well, this is a transitional period, and this transitional period is being handled by the Prime Minister, and the announcement that he's made is that there will be 1 year of mourning, and that the Crown Prince has also asked for 1 year of mourning. And I think there's a lot of respect for that year of mourning. And generally, Thai political culture is Buddhist, so it's compassionate and it's harmonious. So it tends to rally around difficult times like this. And currently what we have seen is some form of unity, rallying around the passing away of a beloved and revered king. So right now, I think the transitional period is managed quite smoothly, and there's unity from all sectors for this period of time.
Of course, this is something that has never happened for 70 years. So when we come to tradition, we do not necessarily know what the traditions are, if we could ever have some clear memories. But let me ask you further, Mr. Lim, before you go, that is, what exactly is the relationship? I understand the harmonious answer you give as the neighbor and coming from the neighboring countries, but we understand the military government is providing $540 million US annually for something called the worship, respect, and uphold the monarchy. This specific campaign alone inside Thailand, despite the quite challenging economy over there in that country. Meanwhile, the military government has also been receiving the blessings of the late beloved king. So what exactly is the relationship? Meanwhile, as we see, the leader of the military government has been doing what they call a bicycle riding inside the royal palace a month ago. Many believe that is a confirmation of his supposed to be appreciation of the crown prince. So what does all of these say about the relationship between the military government and also the royal family at this moment? Mr. Lim, if I could be a little bit specific with you.
Okay, in order to understand the role of the military, we have to look back from the 1930s onwards, where the military has played the role of a unifier in the country. And for the most recent phase of Thai history, we have to roll back to 2014, when there were two factions in Thailand, two political factions with different views about certain political events. And the military stepped in, and it became the unifier, and it was also able to communicate with the beloved, the late king. And through this process, the military has set up a junta and unified the country. So currently, as we speak, the nation or the state has gone into a state of mourning, and the military is still playing this unifying role to oversee the difficult transitional period where beloved and revered king has passed away.
Mr. Yang, here in Beijing, 2 points that we need to make very clear. One is that the reason we're talking about this is not to interfere into any country's internal affairs, but rather as an important neighbor, it is important to understand what's going on in our part of the region. Secondly, it is also important, as Thailand is such an important player within ASEAN and also an important economy inside Asia. So with those preconditions, let me ask you about this. What do you make of the role of the military? It is being called the so-called military government, but its role is very different from what some media report described as the traditional so-called military government. What do you make of it and its relations with the royal family?
Well, first of all, in my observation, the relationship between the military and the royal family has been quite stable, even mature during the past long time. However, we are entering in an uncertain period simply because the king, the beloved king, passed away, and the successor contains quite uncertainties in the politics, shaping the new relationship between the king and the military. And secondly, the uncertainty lies in the emerging classes division between the grassroots and the elite. Currently, the division has been calmed down, but you mentioned earlier, say the election is coming and the referendum hasn't been solved. So both of the events would probably trigger a new round of a crisis, or at least a competition between the two classes. And what kind of role the military could play and should play during the past situation, answer was quite answered. But now the king, the beloved king, as a balancer, judger, and stabilizer, had suddenly gone. So such uncertainties will reshape the relationship between the military and the king, and as well as the Thai as a country, the relation with the neighboring countries.
Once again, as far as you can, Mr. Puprakong from Thailand, there has been a lot of debate about the reform, so-called, of the royal and monarchy inside Thailand. The debate has been about two directions. One is, what about having the, the British type, the Danish type, the Swedish type, and the Japanese type of monarchy? Others are saying, let's just have our Thai type of monarchy. One is supposed to be sort of modern monarchy, the other is traditional type. What do you make of this debate? And how will that debate cast its impact on the near future coming in of the king, if there is going to be? To the extent you can, Mr. Puprakong.
I believe those are false information. There has been no internal debate on the role of monarchy at all, but they may have been outside the country, which, but inside Thailand itself, one thing is clear: the monarch is under the constitution, and we have to go that by the book. And the king, because of the affection he has been held by the people, a personal bond when he gave all college graduate, university graduate diploma. That's a different type of bond which define this invisible role. But so far is clear, and this is why General Prayut, her current role is strictly transitional, and he knows it. He is merely someone who wants to guarantee that successful transition take place between this uncertain time. And I wouldn't answer more questions if you have any, but there has been no discussion of monarchy reform at all.
Okay.
I want to assure you of that.
The other thing is about what kind of king would be popular with the people, and what kind of a king would still keep monarchy to a level as the late king did. I remember Mr. Lim from Singapore. There has been a quote from the most well-known king in the modern history of Thailand, that's the King Chulalongkorn, the most well-respected. He said this, quote, "Being a king not meant to be wealthy. It meant not be bullying others." He also said, "Those who fail to follow my words will certainly lead our clan to disappear," end of quote. Of course, he's saying that in a very different circumstances. But the question is, how popular will the monarchy still be? And what kind of royal family figures, what kind of king will be most welcome? Will the current prince be able to play that role? Sir.
The institution of the monarchy is a revered institution for a very long time, for traditions and also for in terms of tradition as well as in terms of history. It will probably remain a very revered institution for years to come because it's a major component of Thai political life. And King Chulalongkorn is a reformer. He is well respected within the country. And I think the institution of the throne itself can outlive the personalities. So what kind of king and what personality, it really is sort of related to the institution itself. That is much more important than the person. And also this is also for Thai people to think about the Buddhist principles, which is highly related to the throne itself.
Okay,
so the
and
value system as well as the institution holds the institution together.
It's a mix of a lot of factors. Mr. Yang, the reason why it's complicated is not just about the tradition or the religion.
Yeah.
It is also because the general election, according to the plan, is about to come next year. And that's likely to fall before, if 1 year that would take for the crown prince to be the king, before that happens. And usually it is the royal family, the king, that should give the go-ahead of the general election, by the way. So there seems to be a lot of mixed messages. What's likely to be the way that we should look at all of these mixed messages?
Well, no one can answer when the election takes place. The king will have been the position or not. The two different answers will lead to different results. And also, more importantly, no matter the king is in position, he cannot obviously play a role as his father, the predecessor. As I mentioned, the balancer, the destabilizer, no way. However, the other variables remain unchanged, say the sharp division between the red shirts and the yellow shirts. So that is the base of the uncertainties.
Right. Mr. Lim, very briefly with you, 40 seconds if you can. The economy in Thailand is still suffering. That we all know is the most important thing for any general election. How will this mixed message we mentioned earlier, political messages, and this economic issue going to impact if there is going to be any general election?
Thailand is a very important component of ASEAN, especially ASEAN Economic Community, and it's making, as one of the pioneer ASEAN 5 members, making efforts to integrate and also to facilitate the formation of the ASEAN Economic Community, which came into being at the end of 2015. Thailand has also reached out to other major powers like the US, China, Japan. It is a major partner with China looking at the infrastructural development. It's also a major economic partner with the US, and it hosts production networks for the Japanese. So in a sense, it's trying to outreach economically to all the major players in the region.
We hope that will work, and certainly stability and peace for this very important transitional period in the country of Thailand. Thank you so much, the three of you gentlemen, for being with us. It's very important to understand what's going on in our neighborhood, so-called, of the royal and monarchy inside Thailand. The debate has been about two directions. One is, what about having the British type, the Danish type, the Swedish type, and the Japanese type of monarchy? Others are saying, let's just have our Thai type of monarchy. One is supposed to be sort of modern monarchy, the other is traditional type. What do you make of this debate, and how will that debate cast its impact on the near future coming in of the king, if there is going to be? To the extent you can, Mr. Pupakong.
I believe those are false information. There has been no internal debate on the role of monarchy at all, but they may have been outside the country, but inside Thailand itself, one thing is clear: the monarch is under the constitution, and we have to go that by the book. And the king, because of the affection he has been held by the people, a personal bond when he gave all college graduate, university graduate diploma. That's a different type of bond which define this invisible role. But so far is clear, and this is why General Prayut current role is strictly transitional, and he knows it. He is merely someone who want to guarantee that successful transition take place between this uncertain time. And I would answer more questions if you have any, but there has been no discussion of monarchy reform at all.
Okay.
I want to assure you of that.
The other thing is about what kind of king would be popular with the people, and what kind of a king would still keep monarchy to a level as the late king did. I remember Mr. Lim from Singapore. There has been a quote from the most well-known king in the modern history of Thailand. That's the King Chulalongkorn, the most well-respected. He said this, quote, "Being a king not meant to be wealthy. It meant not be bullying others." He also said, "Those who fail to follow my words will certainly lead our clan to disappear," end of quote. Of course, he's saying that in a very different circumstances. But the question is, how popular will the monarchy still be? And what kind of royal family figures, what kind of king will be most welcome? Will the current prince be able to play that role? Sir.
The institution of the monarchy is a revered institution for a very long time, for traditions and also for in terms of tradition as well as in terms of history. It will probably remain a very revered institution for years to come because it's a major component of Thai political life. And King Chulalongkorn is a reformer. He is well respected within the country. And I think the institution of the throne itself can outlive the personalities. So what kind of king and what personality, it really is sort of related to the institution itself. That is much more important than the person. And also this is also for Thai people to think about the Buddhist principles, which is highly related to the throne itself.
Okay,
so the value system as well as the institution holds the institution together.
It's a mix of a lot of factors. Mr. Yang, the reason why it's complicated is not just about the tradition or the religion. It is also because the general election, according to the plan, is about to come next year. And that's likely to fall before, if 1 year that would take for the crown prince to be the king, before that happens. And usually it is the royal family, the king, that should give the go-ahead of the general election, by the way. So there seems to be a lot of mixed messages. What's likely to be the way that we should look at all of these mixed messages?
Well, no one can answer when the election takes place. The king will have been the position or not. The two different answers will lead to different results. And also, more importantly, no matter the king is in position, he cannot obviously play a role as his father, the predecessor. As I mentioned, the balancer, the destabilizer, no way. However, the other variables remain unchanged. Say the sharp division between the red shirts and the yellow shirts. So that is the base of the uncertainties.
Right, Mr. Lim. Very briefly with you, 40 seconds if you can. The economy in Thailand is still suffering. That we all know is the most important thing for any general election. How will this mixed messages we mentioned earlier, political messages, and this economic issue going to impact if there is going to be any general election?
Thailand is a very important component of ASEAN, especially ASEAN Economic Community, and it's making, as one of the pioneer ASEAN 5 members, making efforts to integrate and also to facilitate the formation of the ASEAN Economic Community, which came into being at the end of 2015. Thailand has also reached out to other major powers like the US, China, Japan. It is a major partner with China, looking at the infrastructural development. It's also a major economic partner with the US, and it hosts production networks for the Japanese. So in a sense, it's trying to outreach economically to all the major players in the region.
We hope that will work, and certainly stability and peace for this very important transitional period in the country of Thailand. Thank you so much, the three of you gentlemen, for being with us. It's very important to understand what's going on in our neighborhood. Zhang Bupakong from Thailand, Lin Tan Wei from Singapore, Yang Siyu here in Beijing. Thank you so much for being with us. Stay with us here on World Insight, still to come. China's long working hours are driving some to even the verge of death. Are employees too afraid to say not to work, or has China accepted this as a norm? Stay tuned as we take a look at why this is happening. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News, coming to you every night during the weekday on CCTV News. Long working hours have become the norm for Chinese workers in recent years. People from all walks of life are facing unprecedented pressures to perform as the country undergoes an economic transformation. The recent death of a Chinese health app creator has once again turned the attention to the consequences of overtime. Hard work could bring wealth and promotion, but is it all worth it if our health is being sacrificed?
This song went viral on the Chinese internet earlier this year. It might sound like an over-exaggeration, but the song actually reflects the sentiment behind long work hours.
Basically, I have to work overtime every day. Usually, I will get phone calls from my boss during non-working hours, and I have to answer that. I even have to use my spare time to finish the tasks he gives me.
I usually have to work longer hours, sometimes 1 or 2 hours, sometimes even longer.
Statistics show Chinese workers on an average work longer hours than their counterparts in Western countries. They also face high pressure at work, especially for those in startups. 春语医生 is a Chinese smartphone app that lets users consult with doctors to diagnose their ailments. Ironically, its founder and CEO Zhang Rui died from a heart attack, allegedly brought about by stress and anxiety. He was just 44. China has taken over Japan to be number 1 in the number of deaths from overwork. As of 2014, over 600,000 employees in China had died as a result from that. And over 80% of Chinese employees acknowledge they are already at or approaching the state of overworked. Under Chinese law, standard working hours are capped at 40 hours a week. Overtime is limited to another 36 hours per month. But legal protection is not enough to ensure the mental health and safety of workers.
Overwork is not an isolated problem. It's closely tied to the entire society. China is developing at a fast pace. Most young people and middle-aged workers are facing pressure from their family and their work.
Experts say it's not enough to simply limit work hours. The key, instead, is to create balance in and outside of the workplace. But is this possible in our ever-changing, turbocharged world?
On that, we are joined here in the Beijing studio by Dong Jun, co-founder of the Chinese culture company Ever Beijing Limited. Of course, he is an entrepreneur here in China. And Eric Ding, an epidemiologist and also health economist at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. Welcome to both of you. What do you make, Mr. Dong, of the late news of this young entrepreneur in his early 40s passed away? Heart disease. He is, of course, one of those very active ones on the scene, on the rise,
and he
also
yet
life lost.
Has a background of journalism, and he's not really from the medical background, but he's a very well-known, and his enterprise, his new startup firm, is just about to get IPO listed. Yeah,
so what do you make of it from your perspective as an entrepreneur yourself?
Well, it's sad that it's a lesson for every entrepreneur to learn from, not only about ourselves, but about our employees. Although I always stress, the importance of discipline. I always expect my own employees to come to work 10 to 15 minutes ahead of time, like the Japanese do. But health issue is really something serious.
When you talk about entrepreneurs in China, of course, that's a upswing trend in this economy, very active factor. They are under the spotlight. They are at conferences, on the stage, talking to people, being inspirational, while at the same time, back in the company, they are the leading sheep, shall we say, leading the whole staff forward. And they are expecting themselves to work longer hours, so do their employees. What do you make of it? Is this the very special development stage, or is this just very special a social group that we're talking about here, Mr. Dong?
Well, if you look at the overall picture, China has been the engine of global economic development. It must be running faster than the average. And also the Chinese people are like those crazily running horses to drag the chariots to run faster and faster for several decades already. And now, although the current leadership of China has realized the importance of restructuring the development mode and also for better environment and better health, better healthy lifestyle, but it takes some time. Even this restructuring process may make the distribution of labor force even uneven, and some people get even busier, but other people are kind of laid back.
Mr. Ding, can we really keep that balance given your knowledge of the experiences, let's just say in the United States or elsewhere in Japan, for example, as an economy on the upswing, maintain this speed of development while at the same time individual health? Is it possible?
Absolutely. And I think many companies are very short-sighted when they only think of workers and working more hours, because there's three factors. There's the personal health of your workers in terms of getting obesity, diabetes, cancer, stroke. It's also the safety, because a worker who works long hours and has little sleep is the equivalent of drinking alcohol on the job in terms of mental capacity, memory function. And this gets to a third factor, is the productivity, which you have to realize is productivity goes down exponentially with increasing worker hours. And so I think getting that right balance is really essential. Like, take for example, if in the world of entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley, say Apple or Facebook or even a small startup, the actual number one thing they value is worker happiness and productivity, and that's why all these big tech companies give so much amenities, even startups. And so I think that working smarter and working more productive is the key thing in this transition, because Chinese workers will work very hard, but in terms of productivity per worker economically, Korean Japanese workers are much higher, 2 or 3 folds higher in terms of productivity per hour worker.
I see.
And during that transition, we have to work on that aspect.
Right, Mr. Dong, do you take that? Is this an issue of a different development stage, or is this an issue of realizing what is more important? Can people really control their working hours at this moment?
Well, I think it's, in most cases, I think it's motivation by the employer for the employees to work longer hours.
And also peer pressure as well.
Yes. Also, I think it's relatively easy to understand what Mr. Ding just pointed out. The key word is smart. You need to work smarter. But when it comes to China, the entrepreneurs or the bosses would say, okay, we have a different culture. You know, our people are not always active. They are so passive. If you don't push them hard enough, they will just, you know, steal your hours.
You do sound like an entrepreneur, shall I just say that?
Exactly, and the culture thing can come as an excuse, a big excuse. Yes.
Well, you know, for Mr. Zhang, the one who passed away, and certainly we would like to convey our condolences to his family, but his company has been doing what they call 996, which is 9 o'clock in the morning, you get to the office, 9 o'clock, only after that, p.m., you leave the office. That's only allowed, and also 6 days work, to say the least.
Exactly,
but,
yes.
Mr. Dong, of course, these are clear, you know, slogans of the company, but there are many other hidden practices, not just in China, in the Silicon Valley as well. Just as Mr. Ding mentioned about the beautiful stories from Silicon Valley, people are working overtime. They work at home, for example, with a 24 hours of globalization kinds of business. How can you escape that? So the question is, can we really be able to avoid this, the overwork, all kinds of overwork, Mr. Ding?
Yeah, I have the same problem. You know, some of my colleagues take a digital Sabbath, as they say, 1 day a week, and everyone understands it and has this expectation that they do not reply on the Saturday, for example. But I think long term, there is, I'm an entrepreneur as well, and there is an expectation that you have to get over these work humps. But at the same time, we really have to focus on the productivity, because productivity and the team morale, if you're focusing on it as China's developing into a white collar, more service-based, intellectual-based economy, these things are much more important. These are not just fitting more widgets on an assembly line. That's not how the Chinese economy is moving. It's becoming an intellectual economy. And into an intellectual economy, you have to transition. And you know, say in France, there's a motto. There's people live to work, and some people work to live. And I think we need to get away from working just so you can live. Get to working so you can live, as opposed to living so you can work.
Well, of course, those are beautiful lifestyles, and also it is not just in the Chinese culture or during the current economic development stage of China, but also we've seen very similar phenomena inside Japan. For example, the well-known word karochi actually started from Japan, another Asian country. Even when you talk about those issues in China, as some of the white-collar workers, this is what we have found out. A recent poll shows a majority of those surveyed claim to have no other choice but to work hard or even overtime. Only 30% of Chinese white-collar workers value health over their career, and 17% say they will sacrifice health to make as much money as possible. Of course, those are not necessarily the things we want to encourage with this program. When ill, only around 10% say they will go to hospital, and over 50% say they will just live with it. Startlingly enough, 20% of the medical expenses are on minor illnesses. The rest is spent a month before death. Oh my God, look at that number. That's really threatening. We are not doing this program to threaten anybody who work very hard, but rather to talk about the kind of lifestyle we should have and the right work and life balance, and what our life should be really about. What does professional success mean for our lives? I'm sure those deep questions, Mr. Dong, at every step of your career choices, you have to, as an entrepreneur, think about that. Share with some of those with us.
Well, I might think differently from those entrepreneurs, like Mr. Zhang, who just passed away. We can understand that almost all of those IT startups based on the internet, they shoulder the pressure. They have the pressure from the investors because the investors would expect short-term returns to exceed the average growth rate of national GDP.
So are you blaming the investors? Are you blaming the investors, even though they're looking at them as the angels?
Well, you can blame the overall model of development of China now. Although, as I said earlier, that Mr. President Xi Jinping has stressed the importance of restructuring and changing the model, but it takes some time. We are just in that process. But in this process, when we encourage, innovation and entrepreneurial startups, and it may cause even more such tragedies of workaholics
Well, I
dying.
think it has a lot to do with awareness that people have about work and life balance. Mr. Ding, you yourself also said as an entrepreneur, I mean, you must have the highest level of awareness about this as a medical major. And yet, when it comes to hard choices, how are you making those choices? Can you really follow your conscience, or you have to follow your most depressing job of the hour?
Right. I think once upon a time in my earlier youth, I made those mistakes of sacrificing my health too much in favor of certain pursuits. And I think now that, for example, I have a son, those really, having a child really reorientates your life, that, life is not just about more money and more work, but also spending time so that you can actually enjoy your life outside of it. But during that transition, it was very, very difficult. And I think as young people progress, this is a challenge that we don't have an answer for. But in terms of the costs that you mentioned, 50% of most countries' costs do go to end-of-life care. But I think what people need to focus more on is the prevention aspect. And I'm certainly guilty myself, but this is a struggle, whether it's work-life balance, child, work, family balance,
yes, indeed.
Personal health versus public health, and your job. I think this is a challenge that all countries will have to struggle with. I think especially as China progresses.
It is a personal challenge. It's also a social and economic challenge. Has other economies graduated from this stage? Mr. Dong, very briefly from you, for example, if you look at the Japanese counterparts, your American counterparts?
Well, I think the Japanese, their economy slowed down several decades ago, but they still have that kind of culture, of diligent working, and their work ethics can be a model for the world, although Westerners do not really admire that. But many Chinese would really take that as, as an example for them to learn from. And also, we don't deny that there are, because China is such a huge country, there are millions of Chinese who do enjoy their life somewhere in their own corners around China. But we're talking about the urban workforces in Beijing, Shanghai, and all the other major metropolitan cities. And they face the pressure. They keep to compete against one another. Right. They keep making promises that they cannot meet within 8 hours every day.
I can tell you are discussing this issue from the bottom of your heart, and so does Mr. Ding. We have to say all the best to all the entrepreneurs and everybody who work very hard. It is very important. The balance has to be kept. Thank you so much. All the best. Dr. Eric Ding in the US and Dong Jun here in Beijing with us. Thank you. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.